I want to see it so much I can hardly wait. But I'm afraid there isn't time." "You must go and see your mother this afternoon?" asked the Earl. "You think you can't put it off?" "Why," said Fauntleroy, "she has been thinking about me all the morning, and I have been thinking about her." "Oh," said the Earl, "you have you? Ring the bell." As they drove down the avenue, under the arching trees, he was rather silent. But Fauntleroy was not. He talked about the pony. What colour was it? How big was it? What was its name? What did it like to eat best? How old was it? How early in the morning might he get up and see it? "Dearest will be so glad," he kept saying. "She will be so much obliged to you for being so kind to me. She knows I always liked ponies so much, but we never thought I should have one. There was a little boy on Fifth Avenue who had one, and he used to ride out every morning, and we used to take a walk past his house to see him." He leaned back against the cushions and regarded the Earl with rapt interest for a few minutes and in entire silence. "I think you must be the best person in the world," he burst forth at last. "You are always doing good, aren't you? And thinking about other people. Dearest says that is the best kind of goodness, not to think about yourself, but to think about other people. That is just the way you are, isn't it?" His lordship was so dumbfounded to find himself presented in such agreeable colours that he did not know exactly what to say. He felt that he needed time for reflection. To see each of his ugly, selfish motives changed into a good and generous one by the simplicity of a child was a singular experience. Fauntleroy went on, still regarding him with admiring eyes, those great, clear, innocent eyes. "You make so many people happy," he said. "There's Michael and Bridget and their 10 children, and the apple woman, and Dick, and Mr. Hobbs, and Mr. Higgins and Mrs. Higgins and their children, and Mr. Mordaunt, because of course he was glad, and Dearest and me, about the pony and all the other things. Do you know, I've counted it up on my fingers and in my mind, and it's 27 people you've been kind to. That's a good many, 27." "And I was the person who was kind to them, was I?" said the Earl. "Why, yes, you know," answered Fauntleroy. "You made them all happy, do you know?" With some delicate hesitation that people are sometimes mistaken about earls when they don't know them. "Mr. Hobbs was. I am going to write him and tell him about it." "What was Mr. Hobbs's opinion of earls?" asked his lordship. "Well, you see, the difficulty was," replied his young companion, "that he didn't know any, and he'd only read about them in books. He thought, you mustn't mind it, that they were gory tyrants, and he said he wouldn't have them hanging round his store. But if he'd known you, I'm sure he would have felt quite different. I shall tell him about you." "What shall you tell him?" "I shall tell him," said Fauntleroy, glowing with enthusiasm, "that you are the kindest man I ever heard of, and you are always thinking of other people, and making them happy, and I hope when I grow up I shall be just like you." "Just like me?" repeated his lordship, looking at the little kindling face, and a dull red crept up under his withered skin, and he suddenly turned his eyes away and looked out of the carriage window at the great beech trees, with the sun shining on their glossy red-brown leaves. "Just like you," said Fauntleroy, adding modestly, "if I can. Perhaps I'm not good enough, but I'm going to try." The carriage rolled on down the stately avenue, under the beautiful, broad-branched trees, through the spaces of green shade and lanes of golden sunlight. Fauntleroy saw again the lovely places where the ferns grew high and the bluebells swayed in the breeze. He saw the deer, standing or lying in the deep grass, turn their large, startled eyes as the carriage passed, and caught glimpses of the brown rabbits as they scurried away. He heard the whir of the partridges and the calls and songs of the birds, and it all seemed even more beautiful to him than before. All his heart was filled with pleasure and happiness in the beauty that was on every side. But the old Earl saw and heard very different things, though he was apparently looking out too. He saw a long life, in which there had been neither generous deeds nor kind thoughts. He saw years in which a man who had been young and strong and rich and powerful had used his youth and strength and wealth and power only to please himself and kill time as the days and years succeeded each other. He saw this man, when the time had been killed and old age had come, solitary and without real friends in the midst of all his splendid wealth. He saw people who disliked or feared him, and people who would flatter and cringe to him, but no one who really cared whether he lived or died, unless they had something to gain or lose by it. He looked out on the broad acres which belonged to him, and he knew what Fauntleroy did not, how far they extended, what wealth they represented, and how many people had homes on their soil. And he knew, too, another thing Fauntleroy did not, that in all those homes, humble or well-to-do, there was probably not one person, however much he envied the wealth and stately name and power, and however willing he would have been to possess them, who would for an instant have thought of calling a noble owner good, or wishing, as this simple-souled little boy had, to be like him. And it was not exactly pleasant to reflect upon, even for a cynical, worldly old man, who had been sufficient unto himself for 70 years, and who had never deigned to care what opinion the world held of him, so long as it did not interfere with his comfort or entertainment. And the fact was, indeed, that he had never before condescended to reflect upon it at all, and he only did so now because a child had believed him better than he was, and by wishing to follow in his illustrious footsteps and imitate his example, had suggested to him the curious question whether he was exactly the person to take as a model. Fauntleroy thought the Earl's foot must be hurting him. His brows knitted themselves together so, as he looked out at the park, and thinking this, the considerate little fellow tried not to disturb him, and enjoyed the trees and the ferns and the deer in silence. But at last, the carriage, having passed the gates and bowled through the green lanes for a short distance, stopped. They had reached Court Lodge, and Fauntleroy was out upon the ground almost before the big footman had time to open the carriage door. The Earl wakened from his reverie with a start. "What?" he said. "Are we here?" "Yes," said Fauntleroy. "Let me give you your stick. Just lean on me when you get out." "I am not going to get out," replied his lordship brusquely. "Not to see Dearest?" exclaimed Fauntleroy with astonished face. "Dearest will excuse me," said the Earl dryly. "Go to her and tell her that not even a new pony would keep you away." "She will be disappointed," said Fauntleroy. "She will want to see you very much." "I am afraid not," was the answer. "The carriage will call for you as we come back. Tell Jeffries to drive on, Thomas." Thomas closed the carriage door, and, after a puzzled look, Fauntleroy ran up the drive. The Earl had the opportunity, as Mr. Havisham once had, of seeing a pair of handsome, strong little legs flash over the ground with astonishing rapidity. Evidently their owner had no intention of losing any time. The carriage rolled slowly away, but his lordship did not at once lean back. He still looked out. Through a space in the trees he could see the house